Mandy, Chapter 5. On Saturday morning, Mandy emptied her money box and counted her savings. She planned to spend them when she had finished work at the store. Sue wanted to know what she was going to do. "Oh, buy a few things. Can I come with you?" Well, Mandy didn't know what to say. "I'll be shopping right after work. It would be difficult for us to meet. Besides, I don't quite know what I'll buy." It was true. Until she found out the price of some of the things she needed, she couldn't be just sure what she would buy. Sue looked hurt, and Mandy felt bad. "Tell you what," she said, "if I do buy something, I'll show it to you later. Probably won't get much, though." She ran off down the hallway, yelling at the top of her lungs as she went. "Bye, Ellie. I'm just on my way to the store." Mandy rounded a corner and ran full tilt into Matron Birdie. "Gracious, Mandy, will you look where you're going?" "Oops. Sorry, Mrs. Birdie. I'm terribly sorry." "Why, you're in a hurry this morning," Matron smiled. "And could you please be a little more quiet? I think the entire household now knows that you're going to the store." "Yes, Mrs. Birdie. Thank you, Mrs. Birdie." Mandy scurried away. Walking into the village, she passed Jake riding to work on his bicycle. She waved to him and was glad that she had replaced his tools safely in the potting shed last night. Hopefully, he would let her borrow them again. She would really have to keep on the right side of Jake and show him that she could be responsible and conscientious. Her garden would never be right if she were not able to borrow from him some of the things she needed. Mandy worked hard in the shop all morning. She was there from 9 until 1 o'clock every Saturday, and she always enjoyed herself. She loved the smell of fresh bread and bacon and coffee and fruit and vegetables. Mr. and Mrs. Jennings, who owned the store, were very good to her. She was too young to serve at the counter and to handle the money, but she did a lot of fetching and carrying. She unpacked the new goods and stored them on the shelves and made herself generally useful. Sometimes in the middle of the morning, she was given a hot cup of tea and a biscuit. She was usually so busy that time passed quickly. Today, Mandy was particularly anxious for her work to be finished. She looked at some of the items on the shelves. Soups, chocolate drinks, canned milk, cookies. Wouldn't it be wonderful if she had enough money to buy them all? She decided that she would see how much she had left over after she had purchased her seeds, and then perhaps she would splurge a little. At 1 o'clock, she raced out of the store and down the street to the garden supply shop, with her wages clutched in her hand and her savings jingling in her pocket. To her dismay, she discovered that the garden store had just closed for the lunch hour. She peered through the window and saw the proprietor, Mr. Simple, clearing away some things at the back. She tapped urgently on the glass, trying to attract his attention, but he seemed not to hear her. She moved to the door and shook it hard. He looked up, and she waved, making frantic signs for him to let her in. He hesitated and consulted his watch. "Oh, please, Mr. Simple, dear Mr. Simple, do let me come in," breathed Mandy, and she pressed her face urgently against the glass. Wilfred Simple ambled slowly across the floor and unlocked the door. "Well, Mandy?" "Oh, thank you, Mr. Simple. I'm terribly sorry to bother you at your lunch hour, but I need to buy some things, some seeds and things for a garden, and I wondered if you could possibly help me choose some. It's terribly important. I have the rest of this weekend to do it in. It's a special project, and well, could I please buy some now? I have my money." He smiled at her. "Come in. What sort of things do you need?" "Oh, gosh, flowers mostly. Packages of seeds that I can grow." "Ooh, what are these?" She crossed to a box packed with earth that was sprouting green leaf clusters. "They're pansies, ready for planting out." "How much are they?" "About 4 pence or 5 pence a plant." 5 pence a plant? A single plant?" Mandy was aghast. "But I'll need so many. What about seeds? How much would they cost?" "Well, it's a bit late for seeds, Mandy. You should have planted most of them in February if you wanted to have them ready for transplanting now." dear, what shall I do? Mandy was in despair. With everything so terribly expensive, she didn't see how it would be possible to fill her garden with all the lovely things she had in mind. Mr. Simple put his hand on her shoulder. Now it's not so bad. You don't have to buy pansies, you know. Come and see what else I have. Here, for instance, these are marigold seedlings, and these are what you would call snapdragons, but they're really named antirrhinums. Now they're not expensive, and these salvias would be lovely for your garden. They come up with a gorgeous red flame-like color and have a leaf that looks a bit like mint. They last a long time, too. Mandy brightened. Could you tell me how to plant them? Yes, but first things first. Do you have things like a spade and a trowel and a fork? Oh, I think Jake would lend me most of those things. That's good. Would he lend you a watering can? Mandy thought about it. I don't think he let me have it for that long. And I'd need to water almost every day, wouldn't I? Mr. Simple nodded. Well then, let's see. What kind of garden plot do you have? Mandy described it as best as she could, without saying too much, for fear that Mr. Simple would discover what she was up to. He seemed satisfied, however, with the details she gave him. All right, here's what I suggest, and you tell me if you like the idea. I think you'll need about 30 mixed plants. First of all, you should have some of these wallflowers. He got an empty flat box and packed some wallflower seedlings into it, and marigolds would be a nice splash of color. He added them to the box. And some of these salvias. Like I just said, they'd look lovely. This little plant here is called Sweet Alyssum. It smells marvelous in the summer. It's a little white flower, and it lasts and spreads all the time. It should go around the borders of your garden. As he was talking, he was packing more and more plants into the box. And I think maybe just a few big pansies would finish your garden off a treat. Planting these out will be easy, Mandy. Just make a hole in the ground with your finger or a stick, place the seedling in gently, and pack the earth around it firmly. Put the plants a few inches apart. Then take this little watering can, and he took down a small plastic watering can from the shelf. Now see, it has a very good head on it with the smallest holes, so the water doesn't rush through and drown your plants. It lets out nice and easy, just like the soft rain. Water your flowers after planting and they'll come up strong and healthy. Mandy was thrilled. Here, she said, putting all her money on the counter. Well now, the plants are a gift from me. The watering can doesn't cost very much. Mr. Simple picked up a few coins from the counter. You keep the rest of the money, Mandy. He rang up the amount. Is that all right? Oh, Mr. Simple. Mandy hardly knew what to say. That's just marvelous, she beamed. Oh, one more thing. How much do gardening gloves cost? She had noticed some hanging on display. They're expensive. Why don't you just ask Jake if he has an old pair he wouldn't need anymore? I will, said Mandy. She gathered up her box of seedlings and her watering can very carefully. Sure you can manage now? Said Mr. Simple, letting her out. Oh, yes, and thank you very much. Let me know how they all turn out, Mr. Simple said. He smiled and watched Mandy walk down the road. Then he went back into his shop for his belated lunch. And there's a bunny rabbit. He's a bunny rabbit. Chapter 6. Mandy hid her purchases in the orchard. The staff and children at the orphanage were at lunch, so she was unobserved. She took one look at the wall, and her heart sank at the thought of getting the plants over to the other side. How was she going to manage it? She was too late to eat in the dining room, so she went to the kitchen and ate a sandwich and watched Alice go through the piles of dishes. She noted that Alice got a new package of soap flakes from the store cupboard. She wondered if she could persuade her to give her a package for the cottage. But one thing at a time. Alice, I need a broom. Oh, you do you? Since when did you decide to be such a housewife? Yesterday it was dusters. Today it's a broom. I'd like some more dusters, too. Alice laughed. Now, what are you up to, Mandy? Oh, just a game. Ellie might have a broom. I can give you some more muslin. Super, Mandy smiled. Tomorrow she would talk to Ellie. Meanwhile, Alice seemed in a good mood. She decided to see just how far she could go. Do you have an old saucepan or jug you won't be using? Alice stopped her washing up. She gave Mandy a long, hard look. I might have. I'm busy right now. Ask me later. And could I take a box of soap flakes, please? Alice shook her head. No, Mandy, I'm sorry, but these things cost money, and Matron wouldn't want me giving things like that away. Now, I've already said I'll see if I can find a pan or something, and you'll get your dusters, but that's enough. All right. Mandy decided to change the subject. I'd like to take some bread and butter again today. I'm going to be out most of the afternoon. Alice laughed. You're a fine one. All this talk about cleaning up, and the next thing you're going out. Don't know what you're up to, Mandy. You take care and be sure to be in by dinner time. Mandy promised that she would. She fetched her tea and ran into the garden looking for Jake. She found him about to cut the edges of the front lawn. Hello, Mandy. You brought the rake back. I'm very pleased. I was wondering, Jake, could I please borrow the fork again? Just today. I don't need the rake, just the fork. I didn't quite finish yesterday. I don't see why not. How's the project coming along? Fine, Mandy smiled at him. But Jake, I need a few extra things. Oh, like what? Well, I need twine, and I really need some gloves so that the stinging nettles don't get my hands. Jake stood up and looked at her thoughtfully. This seems a very big thing you're doing. What is it, Mandy? Where is it? Mandy felt a rush of impatience. It was so maddening to have everybody asking her questions. She wished she didn't need to let anyone know what she was doing. I don't want to talk about it yet, she murmured. Wherever it is, it's not around here, Jake said emphatically. We don't have a stinging nettle on the property. You better take care, my girl. Come on, I'll find you some twine. Mandy trotted along beside him. He went into the potting shed and took down a ball of twine from a shelf. About this much? He held out a long piece. Mandy nodded. I'll cut it up into different lengths for you. Gloves, let's see. Scratched his head and looked around. Mandy's attention was caught by a large coil of rope hanging on a nail. She could borrow it. She could use it to tie around her box of seedlings and pull them over the wall. Try these on, Jake was saying. They'll be big, but I think they'll do. Mandy held out her hand, and Jake slipped on a glove, which was at least 2 sizes too large. For what you need them for, they'll do just fine. Here's your fork and the twine. Now off you go. Be sure to bring it back by tonight. Mandy dared not ask for another thing. She ran to the orchard and hid her things along with the seedlings and the watering can she had placed there earlier. But making sure she was unobserved, she made her way back to the potting shed in time to see Jake going toward the front lawn. He didn't see her. She slipped into the shed and took down the rope. After making sure the coast was clear, she raced as quickly as she could back to the orchard. She would have to be quick. Jake could return at any moment, and some of the orphanage children might come along. She could hear their voices as they played by the kitchen garden. She took hold of the fork, stood back, and hurled it as hard as she could over the wall. She heard it land with a clatter. Next, she took up the watering can and threw that, too. Because it was plastic, she didn't think it would be damaged, just this once. She tucked the twine and the gloves in her blouse. Unfolding the long piece of rope, she tied one end of it twice around the box of seedlings, trying to knot the knot in the very center. Then, taking careful aim, she threw the other end at the overhanging branch of the apple tree. After a couple of attempts, it went over and swung loosely. There was no one in sight. Mandy scrambled as quickly as she could to the top of the wall. She was in such a hurry and anxious not to be seen that she scraped her knees and her hands. Very gently, she took hold of the rope and drew the box up toward her. It swayed and bumped against the wall, and for one heart-stopping moment, Mandy felt she would lose all her plans. Some of the packed earth spilled to the ground. She held the rope steady, and gradually the swaying stopped. Beads of perspiration stood out on her forehead. She hoped no one would see her. There was nowhere she could hide herself, and she was absolutely committed now to getting the box over the wall. It was within reach. Holding the apple branch with one hand, Mandy reached down and grabbed the rope firmly where it knotted at the center. She pulled it to the top of the wall and slowly let it down the other side, playing out the rope inch by inch. She felt the box touch the ground gently. She heaved a sigh of relief. She was down the apple tree and untying the knots in a second. Her precious plants were safe. Now all she had to do was return the rope and gather up the food that she had left in the orchard. She found the fork and the watering can and put them beside the seedlings. She coiled the rope and slung it over her shoulder and climbed the apple tree once more. She was just about to put her leg over the top of the wall when she heard someone calling her name. "Mandy!" She hunched down and prayed she wouldn't be seen. "Mandy!" The voice was near. Lifting her head carefully, she looked over the wall. It was Sue wandering discontentedly through the orchard. Mandy bit her lip in annoyance. Why did Sue have to come along right now? Why did she have to call at the very moment when time was so precious and she had so much to get done? She huddled into the tree and kept very quiet. Sue came to a stop almost underneath the overhanging branch, and Mandy held her breath, feeling her head would burst. It'd be so easy to respond to Sue's call, so simple to tell her about everything, but the cottage was her secret. She had found it. It belonged to her. She didn't want to share it, not just yet. Sue gave a big sigh, then she wandered off, disappearing through the orchard trees. Mandy was over the wall in a second. Her legs were aching from crouching. She raced to the potting shed and hung the coil of rope back on the nail. Then, sprinting back into the orchard, she took the little package containing her tea from its hiding place under a bush. She tucked it inside her blouse and climbed the big wall for the third time that day. She was absolutely exhausted by the time she reached the cottage. She still had a full afternoon's work to do. And here is a very sleepy bunny rabbit. See the sleepy bunny rabbit?